Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our fourth episode with the incredible Dr. Kara Margolis. In our last episode, we unpacked the science behind anxiety and depression. Today, we'll explore the invisible factors that influence our gut-brain axis. Dr. Margolis, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So, in theory, our gut-brain axis would be perfect and healthy if we consumed healthy food and content. But that's not always the case. Research actually shows that humans on a weekly basis unknowingly consume a credit card's worth of microplastics. And thinking about it, that's a lot. Imagine having over 50 credit cards in our stomach by the end of the year. So, how do these microplastics physically disrupt the signaling between our gut and our mind? And are we unintentionally poisoning our mind through our environment?
That's a hard question because the studies have been somewhat mixed on microplastics and what's there. Having said that, to answer the question a little more directly about what microplastics do, is that they're thought to cause inflammation in the gut. They're thought to make the gut a little more leaky. So when there's inflammation, that those inflammatory mediators can get into the blood and go to your brain. And microplastics are definitely not good. Where we're getting them from and the amounts that we're having, I think are still somewhat controversial in the literature. So that's not to say that they're not there, but it's that I think we need more research in there to figure out exactly what the role is and how we avoid them if we need to.
Got it, yeah. But then you mentioned the fact that microplastics really lead to a leaky gut. So have you seen any correlation with that and any mental health states?
Sure. I think that area of research is relatively new.
Okay.
So being able to look at that yet, I think that's definitely a hot topic right now and something people are looking at, but not developed enough yet to really make solid claims on there.
Got it, yeah. I think microplastics has recently come up into the hot topic like you just mentioned, so we'll definitely keep an eye out and keep looking on research on that. And so we've talked a little about our gut microbiome in our first episode, which is also known as our gut microbiota, and it's a collection of trillions of microorganisms. So how does our microbiota influence our resilience to stress? And does this mean some of us are born with a gut that makes us more prone to anxiety, or is it a mix of epigenetics too?
Sure. Very good questions and very complex ones. I think you asked a number of questions there. I'd say let's start at the beginning that we know that when babies are born by vaginal birth versus a C-section, that their microbiome tends to be, quote, healthier. And we also know that it mimics more of what the mom's microbiome is. How that functions in the long term, I think, is harder. We know that the microbiome goes through a series of stages up till you're just about 2 years old, where it becomes a more stable microbiome. But it's also so heavily influenced by so many things that it's really hard to trace on a regular basis. So everything that goes into our stomachs, and even not goes into our stomachs, are just our genetics. If we have a disease condition, if we live in one part of the country versus the other, microbiome shifts very quickly. And there are studies that show, what if you eat more processed foods, that maybe your microbiome won't be as healthy, or there may be microbiome associated with different conditions if you're eating healthy foods versus non-healthy foods. The problem is that there's still so much to learn from the gut microbiome. I think I said when we spoke a little bit earlier that the gut microbiome is so different between one person and the next. Just everybody has this individual fingerprint. Everybody has an individual microbiome. But it's even harder than that because we actually don't know what the vast majority of the gut microbiome really is. We haven't found good ways to culture it. And we have the microbiota that we know. There are, I should say, certain things like certain probiotics that may help certain conditions, like traveler's diarrhea. We know that there's a probiotic that can help that. And there's been studies that show associations between specific types of gut microbiome or gut microbiota and anxiety or depression. The the issue there is that the studies are associations, so they're not cause and effect. And so what we can say at this point is that there may be different microbiome that are associated, but we can't tell whether it's, say, the anxiety and depression causing a change in the microbiome or whether it's the microbiome causing the anxiety or depression. And so the best way to do that is to follow babies from birth and through their entire lives to see what happens and what happens first. Does anxiety happen first versus a shift in the microbiome or vice versa? And so those studies are long and expensive, and they have not been done optimally yet, but I know there's a lot going on like that. What I will say is where you can see differences is, say, in inflammatory diseases, in patients with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel diseases. When you give a formula that has no allergens, we call it a hypoallergenic formula, that really clears up your gut microbiome in a way that stops that inflammation. And by stopping that inflammation, because inflammation can cause anxiety or depression, it can really help your whole gut-brain axis. And so I think though that's a good example there. Exactly what we can do to fix our microbiome or what biomarkers are there that can actually be predictive, I still think is, just like you said with microplastics, like a really active area of investigation and something that we need more research into.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you shared really cool insights. But you also mentioned, though, that this field is still ongoing and research, like, still the hot topic, but we've already discovered a lot. And you mentioned that our microbiome is as unique and individualized as our fingerprint. So my microbiome is going to be different from my sister's. And yeah, I think also, as we've talked about earlier, that just like you have neuroplasticity in your brain, you can also have that with your gut and you can change the way it works. So maybe if we're born with a gut that makes us more prone to anxiety, then we can always change that. But obviously, that's something with ongoing research. Like you said, that we need longitudinal studies to track humans as they grow.
But certainly what I would say is also in preclinical studies, so in studies in, say, mice, that when we shift the gut microbiome, we can shift the plasticity in the brain and also in the gut. So the microbiome is capable of altering both of our nervous systems, but it's really hard to show that in humans because you can't look directly at the nervous systems after you change a microbiome.
Got it. And then another key influencer, at least for humans, and definitely we're going to figure this out too, and how it impacts our gut-brain axis, is that sleep impacts mood. And as I just said, we've all experienced it. So, for example, when we try to pull two all-nighters, by the third day we're like a monster. So clearly, our sleep is affecting our mood. Does it also impact the state of our gut? So, what happens in our gut when we don't get an adequate amount of sleep?
Sure, it's a great question. And it's a complicated one. So, certainly, there's been research that's shown that poor sleep habits or poor sleep patterns are correlated with much higher levels of chronic abdominal pain conditions and what we call disorders of gut-brain interaction. So, conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, which is a chronic abdominal pain condition. So, sleep can absolutely impact your gut because sleep also, as you said, can impact your brain. hence why you feel like a monster after pulling two all-nighters, because of that communication, whether sleep impacts the gut directly or impacts the brain to impact the gut would be really hard to figure out. I think the message here is that you need to get good sleep for your gut-brain axis.
Yeah, got it. And then usually if you keep on this example, right? If we like pull two all-nighters, then since obviously we're on zero sleep, we're gonna be stacking up on the coffee and the sugar and keeping the coffee up. So then I would assume that an unhealthy amount of caffeine and sugar is also impacting our gut.
So absolutely impacting our gut and impacting our sleep. So it's like this vicious cycle. So if you keep on staying up all night and then you're drinking more caffeine and sugar to stay up, it's harder to go to sleep. You feel edgier. So then it's hard to go to sleep when you actually can. And at the same time, when you have a lot of sugar has been shown to also have potentially negative impact on your gut microbiome and in your gut motility. And it becomes this vicious loop of bad food, bad sleep, and bad mood.
Yeah. I got it, yeah. And then I guess the easiest way to break the cycle is that if you're feeling tired, you don't reach for the coffee cup, you reach for the pillow and the bed. And then once you sleep, then you don't need the coffee anymore. And then you listen to your body and you go back to sleep. And I think just like you said, the easiest way to get out of the cycle is just to sleep.
Right. But that's hard. I understand with
Yeah.
the pressures today and what to do, but it goes back to that idea of tips for good sleep hygiene and that everybody has nights where they have to pull in all nighter. When I was in residency, we used to stay up all night taking care of patients. But what I did when I got home was ate a healthy meal and didn't turn on the screens and would then try to go to sleep. And so, really, to try to rebalance yourself as opposed to doing things that are going to perpetuate the cycle.
Yes, sleep hygiene is very important. And so we've been focusing a lot on the gut and the mind and their interaction. So, how does any abdominal pain also impact our mental state? Does that also play a role in our gut-brain axis?
There have been studies looking at whether the gut impacts the brain or the brain impacts the gut. And it's certainly been shown that people who have chronic stress are much more likely down the line to develop digestive issues. But on the other hand, there's also been studies that have shown that people who have digestive issues are much more likely down the line to develop mental health disorders. Abdominal pain, just like a lot of other digestive issues, absolutely send signals up to the brain, which can have negative effects on your mood. Whether that happens, there's been a lot of research really focusing on this to see how it is. And what we can see is that when you have abdominal pain, right through those spinal pathways, that you have signals that go into the brain. And a lot of the areas that are activated that can cause stress and anxiety are similar areas that can affect mood. So there is a lot of mixing when you have either symptom in causing the other.
Got it, yeah. And you mentioned like just like our gut or like digestive issues, abdominal pain also does play a role and it actually does have like a voice in the communication and interaction between the gut and the brain. And now to wrap up, I want to talk with you about what we call like the biological shadow. So we often walk into a big presentation or a final exam thinking our success depends entirely on our mindset at that specific moment. But how does like the gut debt of what we did yesterday, what we ate, how much we stressed, how we slept, how does that dictate our capacity to handle a challenge today?
I think that's a great question. And it really circles back to a lot of what we've been talking about. The best way to prepare yourself for anything, for any talk, even for everyday life, not only tests, is to try to take care of yourself in the best way possible. If you think about marathon runners, they always have a big pasta dinner right before a marathon so they can build up that energy that they need for the marathon. And not every day here is a marathon. But what you need is you need to regulate your bodily systems and put them in the most stable homeostatic balance so that you can prepare yourself the same things that you use to prepare yourself to encounter everyday challenges, like me being nervous going on a podcast, is the same way that I would prepare to go give a talk in front of 1,000 people. I try to get a good night's sleep. I try to eat healthy. I have a balanced breakfast so that I'm not hungry. I try not to have so much caffeine that you can see my hands jittering when I'm on the camera. And that even in the morning, I go and I exercise and think about what I'm going to say to prepare myself. So I think that rather than saying just the day before, I think it's really looking at a way of life and trying to balance it as best you can. And the good news is you don't have to be perfect at that, right? I'm certainly one who has days where I have a lot of caffeine, eats a huge waffle with chocolate sauce at 10 o'clock in the morning. When you should do those things, those are things that, that everybody does if you enjoy that waffle. But you just want to balance it out with things that are healthy and with habits that are healthy, because fortunately, our bodies are resilient. And so you can recover from things, but you have to, in general, take good care of yourself.
Yeah, I think you explained it very beautifully that it's not just what you do the night before that impacts, but also like the lifestyle and what you do the weeks and months before that. And I found it really cool how you talked about number one, you also showed like the importance of the night before, like with carb loading before a marathon, but then you also said that it's actually the lifestyle and what you do every day that makes a bigger difference than what you just do a night before. And I know many doctors say this too, is that when you go for blood tests, people usually think that if I eat really healthy the week before I get my blood drawn and I have all these like green smoothies, but what I ate a month before was like a lot of like junk, then that's also visible in your blood tests once it's drawn. And yeah, I think you really put that very nicely that your lifestyle plays a big impact. And it's not that you have to be on a strict diet every day, just keeping a healthy diet usually, and once in a while having like a waffle or a piece of cake isn't going to do anything, but if you're doing it every day, 3 times a day, then it is definitely impacting you.
Absolutely.
So, thank you so much, Dr. Margolis, for these fascinating insights. Our past 4 episodes have been incredibly eye opening, and I'm amazed at how smart our body actually is. You've proven that we can't just focus on our mind, we also need to take care of our gut and the way they communicate. And when our gut and our brain are in coherence, we can be unstoppable. So, once again, thank you, Dr. Margolis.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every month, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we thank you so much for listening.